I'm delighted to bring up on this conversation, how can we foster creative-driven economic growth in the world that we're living in today? Let's give a warm welcome to one of the better financial minds. Ian was talking about the financial industry today. This is one of the champions of it, and can talk about some of the challenges and opportunities in that space as well. Steve Pagliuca is a senior advisor at Bain Capital and also the chairman and founder of PAGS Group. Good to see you. Thanks.
Good to be here.
Yeah, good. It's great to have you for this fireside chat, which is also 20 minutes. And then we're going to have, quite interesting, the founder of Waze, the group that does the mapping and shows about the startup nation of Israel. You wanted to talk about where Ian was addressing some of the threats to globalization today. So let's take it from an investor's standpoint. Can we make sure that globalization is preserved? If I'm a major manufacturer and I've had all these supply chains so tightly linked and they were broken during the pandemic, and even seeing that ship, the Ever Given, stuck in the Suez, right? And I need to deliver product, how do I handle it today? Is that one of the major trends that's going to be driving change over the next 10 years?
Well, I think as we step back at Bain Capital, we look at the major trends that are happening. I think Ian's right. The decoupling that's going on right now is, I would call it a strategic decoupling. It's not a massive decoupling. As he said, trade with China was at an all-time high last month with the U.S. But I think the countries have realized that you can't be cut off of critical supplies.
Yeah, just have this very directional mic, yeah.
Critical supplies, such as medical, chips, certain technologies. So we try to call it a strategic decoupling, and it's going to involve 5 to 10% of the trade, not 100% of the trade. And
that's interesting.
And we've become so interdependent upon China for the flows, and China us. I think that's really hard, and there's not going to be a major decoupling. It's just going to be where you need strategic goods and products, and there'll be some ones in the gray area, but we're talking about 5-ish%, not 90%.
Not a revolution. I was talking about this with Ian and the theme I've been picking up in the last year or so, the ability to map and think out of the box. Now, in the China structure, they plan for 30 to 50 years, and they've homed in on Africa and the natural resources. They have 85% of the strategic refining capacity of rare earth minerals, which are needed for the transition of, solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicle batteries, and everything else. What do we need to do in the West to start thinking not through the next election cycle, but planning our industrial strategy? I think the Inflation Reduction Act had a lot to do with the green infrastructure is part of that, but what would you suggest so we have more commonality in planning?
I think the Inflation Reduction Act was a start at that. I met with Gina Raimondo, who's very keen on making sure that the U.S. has its own strategic chip supply.
For our group here, who's that, Gina?
Gina Raimondo is the Secretary of Commerce of the United States, and she's written a paper and has really pushed this ability to kind of control our own destiny in terms of key supplies. We talked about chips, other technologies. But what is really going to happen is the world's going to have to decide, and this is why this is such a great summit, that we have to work together. Because if these strategic lithium supplies are cut off, these rare earths, then the whole economy is going to go into a tailspin. And if you step back, the major trends out there are easing back from quantitative easing, a walk away from quantitative easing, which means we're going to have normal interest rates. In my career, most of my career, 80% of my career, interest rates were 4.5%, 5% in T-bills. Only in the last 12 years since the crisis have we had this cheap money. So now we knew what would happen. At some point, the world has woken up and said, we can't have the inflation. Every economy that's increased the money supply over 50% in the last 200 years has experienced massive inflation. So the world's woken up, and we're going to have normalized interest rates. We think that's going to be in place for decades.
This is the new normal.
Back to the future is the new normal.
It's so interesting because that you say that, because from the journalistic community, and having retired 18 months ago, the alarmists in the headlines, the highest inflation in 50 years. Yeah, I get it, since the late 1979, 1980, I get it. Interest rates at 4%. I mean, that was pretty reasonable. I mean, in our high school years, 18 to 20% became the consumer rate of borrowing. And do we need to kind of reset ourselves and say, what are our expectations, and how do you take advantage of that as an investor then?
Well, I think we go back to fundamentals, and I think it's positive that money costs something, because the speculative bubble was created by the fact of very cheap and free money, and people were taking very low discount rates and looking at businesses that wouldn't make money for 20 years and valuing them at a very high level. So now you've seen that correction. And when Bain Capital was founded, we were dealing with interest rates of 9, 10, 11%. And we were very successful because you had to have businesses that grew profits and could pay those kind of fees. So I think we're going back to a fundamental area. It's great for Bain Capital because we come from the consulting side, where we deal in facts and data and gain some market share and trying to really transform companies and build them into bigger and better companies, and actually grow companies, and that's where the profit is.
Good. The PAGS Group is, as in Pagaluta, right? The name of your family name. And you're looking at major mega trends, and we're going to do a session tomorrow with Her Excellency Sarah and Mary on space, right? And what opportunities are there for space. So for this group, why don't we break down how an investor sees space, the potential for space, the 3D printing that could be inspired because of what's needed into space. You want to take it from there?
Absolutely. At the PAGS Group, we're really looking at growth opportunities and funding growth opportunities, startups and areas that are going to have, we think, in the next 10 to 20 years, massive growth, even further than that. So space is one of them, biotech's another one, artificial intelligence, software, chips is another one. Let's step back on space. There's a revolution in space that's happened from the privatization of the space industry. It took many, many years to put a man on the moon. Now Elon Musk, who will be speaking here, is cranking out rockets, at a prodigious pace, putting satellites up at a prodigious pace, and that has spawned a whole, new industry of space and space travel and space manufacturing. So we've looked at several areas that will support that industry and grow. There's a company called Relativity that is doing 3D printing of rocket fuselages. Right now, Elon Musk is costing about $5 million to build a giant fuselage for those rockets. And an entrepreneur has come up with a technique to use 3D printing to print these giant fuselages. And right now, the cost about $5 million to build one. To print it is going to be, they're estimating $500,000 to $1 million. So really reduction in the cost. And secondly, because with 3D printing, you can design exactly what the rocket looks like and what materials will be made out of. They can make it actually much lighter and stronger at the same time, which I think will give you capability to go to the moon and further from there. Another area in space is the fact that you have now these much cheaper rocket boosters, and the rocket boosters can carry payloads that can do space manufacturing. And there are certain biotech products, and there are certainly cable and fiber optics that can be manufactured in space. So we're invested into a startup company that is building capsules where you can do space manufacturing. And if you manufacture fiber optic cable in space, it takes out all the impurities. Right now, it's 99% pure, but you can make it 100% pure in space because there are no tiny oxygen bubbles in it because there's no oxygen in space. And therefore the cable can increase its capacity by 100 times. Good. So space manufacturing is going to be a big area.
Can I ask you something? Take a sip of water because it is pretty dry in here. Now that you're an advisor to Bain and not running the business, what kind of makes you percolate in terms of excitement? Because you're looking at space, you're looking at health tech. I know you wanted to talk about the energy transition, which I covered for years and years and years, but what's the spark that kind of gets you out of bed and say, gosh, that's an amazing opportunity at this stage of life?
I think the spark is just looking at these growth areas, and it's really exciting. You think about when we were growing up, who would have thought about manufacturing in space? Who would have thought about biotechnology? That's another area we're focused on. We've done 57 biotechnology deals and helped start several companies.
57?
Yeah, 57.
Wow. Jeez.
Now the human genome has now been mapped for 20 years. It cost billions of dollars to map the first human genome. Now it's down to hundreds of dollars. That development has really made biotech take off because you can do computer simulations. You combine the mapping of the genome with quantum computing, and now you have a powerful engine to map the human body, figure out how to fix diseases, and that is we're only in the first starting of that. There's been many advances, but certainly in Boston, where I'm from, it's kind of the epicenter, an ecosystem of biotech. And so we're going to solve many diseases we could never solve before. My daughter-in-law actually, who I funded a company, directly started a company that is taking stem cells and turning them into pancreatic cells. And that will cure type 1 diabetes. And that company was started about 6 years ago with venture capital money. My family foundation actually funded a state-of-the-art wet lab, which I would suggest for governments around the world to do this, but we privately funded a state-of-the-art wet lab at Harvard. And any student can come in there and use that wet lab to start a business if it goes through a panel. And already in about 4 years, there's been 60 businesses started. They've raised $500 million of capital in the life sciences and biotech area. So that can be used, I think, as a model for the world to spread this technology and spread it out from Boston and San Francisco into the world to solve huge global health problems and make it a better world. So that's what really excites me, that space, biotech. We talked about the energy transition earlier.
Good. In fact, let's drill into the energy transition. This is a country that has capacity of 5 million barrels a day. Saudi Arabia has capacity of 12 million barrels a day, but they're very cognizant of what the trend is for the next 20 to 30 years. In fact, sources here say that they're kind of relying on 20 years of oil demand, not a lot more than that. How do you play that as an investor? What do you think of this Inflation Reduction Act, which had a very large component to build the infrastructure for the energy transition?
Well, it was absolutely needed. I think we have not recognized that the energy transition is going to take a lot longer even than the 10 to 20 years. It is very hard to change the entire global system of carbon-based energy to non-carbon-based industry. If you look at what's happened in the last 20 years, I think we've moved the needle by 7% or so, 8% or so. So when you do the math, decarbonization by 2030 is not realistic unless there's some massive technological breakthrough. And I think there'll have to be some breakthroughs to get there. So I believe the governments have to come together and recognize that moving to cleaner carbon fuels, sequestration, other technologies are going to be around a lot longer. I think it's a 30-year horizon, maybe a 40-year horizon, even 50-year horizon. And secondly, to create an entire parallel energy infrastructure is going to be high cost and cause, again, inflation that we're already trying to reel from the quantitative easing. So I think the energy transition is a major trend for the next 10 to 20 years. And technology plus a more realistic and prudent management of that transition is going to be very important.
Good. It's interesting because you could take a step back and say the crisis in Russia and Ukraine. We had the commissioner in Cairo at an energy forum yesterday. She said, they cut demand by 20%. I mean, when you need to focus on a clear and present danger, that's one component, right? And you said there's a technology revolution at the same time. But from an investment standpoint, if I'm looking at new opportunities for job growth and managing a transition and protecting my population, where are you applying money now in this transition?
Well, people are looking at hydrogen.
In a big way, right?
In a big way.
Yeah.
I think nuclear is going to make a comeback. France has been very successful with their nuclear program.
Have you followed small modular reactors at all? Because the U.S. is cutting edge in terms of technology on that.
Absolutely, and these technologies are much safer than the perceptions of way back of 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl. They've been very safe in France, and so something is going to have to fusion, something's going to have to merge to help us, get there. I don't think we just get there with wind power and solar power. There's not enough out there.
Okay, good. One of the other mega trends that you've been looking at is an aging population, and you talked about it in biotech, but particularly in Western Europe and the United States, we've even seen this emerging in China. What does that mean in practice for governments? The ability to have, as we do in the United States, a Social Security fund and retirement at what was 62, 65, 67, because that's a medical breakthrough, but it's also a burden for government. How do you see the aging population?
Well, it's really an astounding trend that probably is not talked about enough. If you look at a country like Japan, I think you've seen a reduction of 15 million in population over the last 10 years. So Japan is actually shrinking. They're projecting in 2050, 2060, you'll have 35% of the population that's over 65. So the government there and governments around the world in Western economies, China is shrinking in population, Japan's shrinking in population, the US is getting to neutral. So either countries are going to have to look at immigration or policies that promote growth. And also, it's going to put enormous strain on, coming back to biotech, the healthcare system. There's been an emptying of cities in Japan. The small cities outside of Japan are halved in population, and most of the population there is 65, 75 years old. There are people that are, when you go to Japan, there are people that are 90 years old that are still working. So this is going to be a major demographic trend that governments will have to deal with. That how do you increase productivity using AI, using robots, using all sorts of technologies, so you can protect this aging population. And secondly, how do you get your population younger? This region has a benefit in that the population is very young.
Yes.
And therefore, you have huge growth potential with the energy, with the population that you have, and transitioning into these other services and areas like biotech and areas like space. I think there's enormous potential here.
Good. I think we would be remiss not picking your brain on the political landscape in the United States, if you don't mind. We didn't talk about this on the phone the other day, but the pendulum swings. We swing to populism and then we swing back the other way. It doesn't seem like there's space in the middle for like a Bill Clinton type or a Mitt Romney centrist, but one a Democrat, one a Republican. Where is America going? And can it be a global thought leader, a global convener? With Ian Golden, we talked about the Cold War. I mean, from your standpoint, Steve, and living in America but a globalist, how do you see it?
I think we've had periods in our history where we go from cooperating to extreme, populism, and wars have resulted in it's been a result of that. I think we're at a dangerous time right now that we've gone away from this concept of globalization, which has lifted 2 billion people out of poverty. We haven't been thoughtful about it because there are many people that got left behind. That's why you saw Brexit. That's why you see the issues in the polarization in the United States. So I think we're becoming cognizant of that. In general, I'm an optimist because the United States has a lot of its own energy, has great education systems, has great technology, has great biotech. So and we are now recognizing this issue of income inequality and trying to solve that. And I'm confident.
Can I interrupt just a second?
Yes.
Because I was shocked when I go back as an American. We have a very good private school education system, I think. The state school system, state universities are good in different states. But government's not supporting people with decent health care that's affordable and a decent education system. Aren't these kind of key pillars that have to be rethought?
These are absolutely key pillars. The political forces in the United States have not really changed education in 100 years. It's maybe the only industry that has not gone down the experience curve. So if you go to the place where I went to grade school, not much has changed. They have a few personal computers there, but not much has changed about the fundamental aspect of teaching. And when you think about things like ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, we haven't talked about artificial intelligence. That's another, and quantum computing. Those are another huge areas where
it's a revolution.
It's a revolution. It's going to increase productivity dramatically. These technologies should apply to education. Now you're seeing in the United States many more private enterprises doing their own training, setting up their own education. getting people involved in software coding, all the things of the future. So I think the system's going to have to kind of work around the inertia that we've seen in education for 100 years. The politicians don't talk about it because they're supported by the educators. And we're going to have to really work around it. And you're seeing many more public-private partnerships for education and corporations, working with people directly.
Because they need talent anyway.
Because you need talent. And we're going to have to look at our immigration. One great thing about this region is it's easy to come in and work.
Yeah.
They've made it very simple with golden visas and all the things you can do here and set up businesses. The United States was built upon immigration. My grandfather was a shoemaker, making $8 a week in New York with very little education. And my father went to college. Now all of my kids have gone to college. All of my brothers and sisters went to college, and so that's the American dream.
Yes.
We're going to have to recreate that, and immigration was a big piece of that. So I think we have to go back and examine the fundamentals. We need more immigration. We need better health care. We need better education, and these technologies can help deliver that.
Great. We're involved with the World Government Summit live studio, and they said, who could be a great mind that understands global financial markets? You've probably been getting people grabbed you for interviews a lot. He's very popular in the world of global financial television, that's for sure. And we really appreciate the time. It's good to see you.
It's great to be here.
Nice round of applause. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Steve.